Billionaire catches a 7-year-old poor girl saving his 6-year-old paralyzed son on the beach. When she calls 911, something shocking happens, and the billionaire begins to cry. Before we share this tale, give it a like and comment where you're watching from, and one thing that makes you smile. The scorching Miami sun beat down mercilessly on the crowded beach as 7-year-old Emma clutched her little brother, Jake's tiny hand. At just 3 years old, Jake's stomach growled so loudly that other beachgoers turned to stare. They hadn't eaten in 3 days. "Emma, I'm hungry," Jake whimpered, his bright blue eyes filled with tears that threatened to spill over his dirt-stained cheeks. "I know, baby. We'll find food soon," Emma whispered, her own stomach cramping with familiar pain. In her free hand, she held their only remaining possession, a pair of worn sneakers she hoped to sell for $5. 50 yards away, billionaire tech mogul Richard Sterling pushed his 6-year-old son, David's wheelchair, closer to the water's edge. David had been paralyzed from the waist down since a car accident took his mother's life 2 years ago. The boy's face lit up as the waves touched his feet. "Daddy, can we stay longer?" David asked, his voice barely audible above the crashing waves. Richard smiled sadly. Despite all his wealth, he couldn't give his son what he wanted most, the ability to run and play like other children. "Of course, buddy, whatever makes you happy." That's when disaster struck. A massive wave, bigger than the rest, surged forward with unexpected force. Richard had turned for just a moment to grab sunscreen from their beach bag when the wave hit David's wheelchair, instantly pulling both boy and chair into the churning surf. "Daddy!" David screamed as the wheelchair tipped sideways, his head disappearing beneath the foamy water. Richard spun around in horror, but the wheelchair was already 20 feet from shore, being dragged further out by the retreating wave. His son's terrified face appeared and disappeared beneath the surface as Richard dove into the water, his expensive suit soaking instantly. But Emma had already seen everything unfold. Without hesitation, she dropped Jake's hand and their precious shoes, sprinting toward the water with determination that belied her 7 years. "Call 911. She shouted to stunned beachgoers as she dove into the waves, her small body cutting through the water with surprising skill. She'd learned to swim in the dangerous canals near their abandoned warehouse home, where survival meant adapting quickly. Emma reached David just as Richard was struggling against the current. The wheelchair had flipped completely, trapping the boy underwater. With strength born of desperation, Emma helped Richard right the chair while keeping David's head above water. "I've got him!" Richard gasped, finally able to grip his son properly. But as they fought their way back to shore, Emma noticed David had stopped breathing. The moment they reached shallow water, she immediately began the CPR she'd learned from a homeless veteran who'd looked after them briefly. "Come on, breathe!" Emma pressed rhythmically on David's small chest. "Please breathe!" David suddenly coughed up seawater and drew a shuddering breath. His eyes fluttered open, focusing on the small girl who'd saved his life. Richard collapsed onto the sand beside them, overwhelmed with relief and gratitude. He looked at Emma, really looked at her, and saw the hollowed cheeks, the oversized clothes hanging on her tiny frame, the calloused hands of a child who'd known too much hardship. That's when he noticed 3-year-old Jake standing at the water's edge, crying hysterically for his sister, their discarded shoes scattered in the sand. "Are you—" Richard's voice cracked. "Are you two alone out here?" Emma's chin lifted defiantly despite her exhaustion. "We take care of ourselves." But Richard Sterling was no ordinary man. He'd built his fortune by reading people, by understanding their deepest needs and fears. And looking at these two children, he saw something that shattered his carefully constructed emotional walls. As the paramedics arrived, called by other beachgoers, Richard Sterling, worth over $2 billion, began to cry. The ambulance sirens wailed as paramedics checked David's vitals, confirming he was stable but needed observation. Richard couldn't take his eyes off Emma, who sat protectively beside Jake on a beach chair someone had provided. "Sir, your son is going to be fine," the lead paramedic reported. "But he needs to go to the hospital for a thorough checkup. That was a close call." Richard nodded absently, his attention still fixed on the two orphaned children. Emma was carefully cleaning sand from Jake's scraped knee, with a gentleness that spoke of years of being his sole caretaker. "Excuse me." Richard approached them slowly, not wanting to frighten them. "I'm Richard Sterling. I can't thank you enough for what you did." Emma looked up warily. At 7, she'd learned that adults often made promises they didn't keep. "Is your boy okay?" "Thanks to you, yes, he's going to be fine." Richard crouched down to their eye level. "What are your names?" "I'm Emma. This is Jake," she said simply, wrapping her arms around her little brother. "Where are your parents?" The question hung in the air like a physical weight. Emma's jaw tightened. "We don't have any." Richard felt his heart constrict. "Where are you staying?" Emma hesitated, then pointed vaguely toward the city. She wasn't about to reveal their hiding spot, an abandoned building where they'd been squatting for the past month. "Have you eaten today?" Richard asked gently. Jake's stomach answered with a loud rumble, and Emma's cheeks flushed with shame. "We're fine," she insisted, but her voice wavered. David, now sitting up on the stretcher, had been listening to the conversation. Despite his own trauma, the 6-year-old was struck by something in Emma's voice, a loneliness he recognized from his own life. "Daddy," David called out, "can they come with us to the hospital? Emma saved me." "She's my hero." Richard looked at his son, then back at the two children who clearly needed help more than they'd ever admit. "Emma, would you and Jake like to come with us? Just to make sure you're both okay? That was a brave thing you did, and I'd feel better knowing a doctor checked you over too." Emma's instincts screamed danger. Adults who seemed too nice usually wanted something, but Jake was looking at her with those trusting eyes, and she could see he was getting weaker from hunger. "We don't have money for doctors," she said quietly. "You don't need to worry about that," Richard replied. "Please, it's the least I can do. Least I can—" 45 minutes later, they were all in Richard's private hospital room. He'd insisted on the best care for David and had quietly arranged for Emma and Jake to be examined as well. Dr. Sarah Martinez pulled Richard aside after completing her examinations. Her expression was grave. "Mr. Sterling, those children are severely malnourished. The little boy is showing signs of dehydration, and Emma has what appears to be an untreated infection in her left foot. When did they last have a proper meal?" Richard felt sick. "I don't know. They were on their own on the beach." "Sir, I have to ask, are you planning to contact Child Protective Services? These children need immediate intervention." The question hit Richard like a physical blow. He thought of Emma's fierce independence, her protective stance over Jake. He thought of the system that had failed them so completely that a 7-year-old was begging on beaches. "Doctor, what if I could provide for them temporarily? Just until we figure out a better solution?" Dr. Martinez studied him carefully. "Mr. Sterling, taking in 2 traumatized orphan children isn't like adopting a puppy. Are you prepared for what that means?" Richard looked through the room's window at Emma, who was gently helping Jake drink from a juice box a nurse had brought. She was so small, yet she carried herself like she bore the weight of the world. "She saved my son's life," Richard said quietly. "Maybe it's time someone saved hers." 3 hours later, Richard found himself in the strangest situation of his 52 years. Emma sat stiffly in the leather passenger seat of his Bentley while Jake dozed in the back, finally full after devouring 2 hospital meals. David's wheelchair was secured beside Jake, and his son chattered excitedly about his new friends. "Where are we going?" Emma asked, her voice tight with suspicion. "My house," Richard replied. "Just for tonight? You both need rest and proper food." Emma stared out the window as they drove through increasingly affluent neighborhoods. "We can't pay you back." The simple statement nearly broke Richard's heart. "Emma, you already paid me back. You saved David's life." "That doesn't mean you owe us anything," she said, with a maturity that no 7-year-old should possess. Richard pulled into the circular driveway of his oceanfront estate, a sprawling mansion that had felt more like a mausoleum since his wife Catherine's death. Emma's eyes widened despite herself. "You live here? Just you and David?" "Yes. It's been pretty quiet since." Richard's voice caught. He rarely spoke about Catherine, but something about Emma's directness made him want to be honest. "Since David's mother died." Emma turned to study him with those impossibly wise eyes. "That's why David seems sad sometimes, even when he smiles." The observation was so accurate, it took Richard's breath away. "Yes, exactly." Inside the house, Maria Santos, Richard's longtime housekeeper, took one look at the children and immediately sprang into action. She'd worked for the Sterling family for 15 years and had mourned Catherine's death almost as deeply as Richard had. "Dios mío," she whispered, seeing Jake's thin frame and Emma's protective posture. "These niños need food immediately." "Maria, could you prepare something gentle for their stomachs? They haven't eaten properly in days," Richard requested. As Maria bustled toward the kitchen, Emma remained frozen in the marble foyer, overwhelmed by the opulence surrounding her. Crystal chandeliers, oil paintings worth more than most people made in a lifetime, furniture that looked too expensive to touch. "It's okay," David said, wheeling up beside her. "Everything looks fancy, but it's just a house." "Want to see my room? I have video games." For the first time since the beach, Emma's guard dropped slightly. "Jake likes games, the simple ones." "I have those too." David's face lit up. "Come on." As the children headed toward the stairs, Richard carrying Jake while David used his stairlift, Richard felt a presence beside him. Maria had returned from the kitchen, her weathered hands clasped together. "Senor Sterling," she said softly in accented English, "those children, they have been alone for a very long time." "How can you tell?" "The way the little girl watches every door, every window, the way she positions herself between her brother and any adult. She has been their mother, father, and protector." Maria's eyes filled with tears. No child should carry such weight. Richard nodded, feeling the truth of her words. "Maria, what am I doing? I don't know anything about raising children, especially children who've been through trauma." Maria smiled sadly. "Senor, you have been raising David alone for 2 years. You know more than you think. But these children, they will not trust easily. They have learned that adults disappear." That evening, after Jake fell asleep on the living room couch and David was settled in his room, Richard found Emma standing on the back deck, staring out at the ocean. The same ocean where she'd risked her life that morning. "Can't sleep?" he asked, joining her at the railing. "I don't sleep well in new places," Emma admitted. "Jake does, but I need to watch out for him." "Emma," Richard said carefully, "what happened to your parents?" The question hung in the salt air for a long moment. When Emma finally spoke, her voice was barely a whisper. "Car accident, 8 months ago. We lived with our aunt after that, but she—" Emma's voice hardened. "She had a boyfriend who didn't like kids. One day we came home and the locks were changed." Richard felt rage building in his chest. 8 months you've been on your own." Emma shrugged with forced casualness. "We figured it out. Jake doesn't really remember them anymore. Sometimes that's better." "No," Richard said firmly. "That's not better. It's not fair, and it's not your fault." Emma looked up at him then, and for just a moment he saw the frightened little girl beneath her armor of independence. "Adults always leave," she said simply. "It's easier if you don't expect them to stay." Richard knelt down to meet her eyes. "Emma, I lost my wife 2 years ago. David lost his mother. I know about people leaving when you need them most, but I also know about people who show up when you least expect it. He gestured toward the beach in the distance. This morning, when David needed someone most, you showed up. Maybe it's time someone showed up for you too. The next morning brought chaos of a kind Richard had never experienced. Jake woke up crying at 5 a.m., disoriented by the unfamiliar surroundings. Emma was instantly alert, comforting him in whispered tones that broke Richard's heart with their practiced efficiency. "It's okay, Jakey. We're safe. Remember the nice man with the sad boy? We're at his house." Richard appeared in the doorway of the guest room where he'd settled them the night before, having heard Jake's cries through the baby monitor he'd hastily installed. "Everything all right?" Emma's walls immediately went back up. "We're fine. We can leave if we're causing problems." "Emma, you're not causing problems. You're both welcome here as long as you need." Richard ran a hand through his disheveled hair. "Are you hungry? Maria's already making breakfast." Downstairs, David was already at the kitchen table, having been helped there by Maria. His face lit up when he saw Jake toddle into the room, still rubbing sleep from his eyes. "Jake! Want to see something cool?" David pressed a button on his wheelchair, and it rose to put him at table height. Jake giggled and clapped, the sound bringing the first smile Richard had seen on Emma's face. Over breakfast, pancakes, fresh fruit and orange juice that Jake declared the best ever, Richard found himself watching Emma with growing concern. She ate slowly, methodically, but he noticed she kept pushing food toward Jake's plate when she thought no one was looking. "Emma," Richard said gently, "there's plenty of food. You don't have to share yours." "I know," she replied, but she didn't stop. After breakfast, Richard faced a problem he'd never anticipated. What to do with two children who had no legal documentation, no school records, and no official existence in the system. He called his lawyer James Patterson, who'd handled Catherine's estate and various business matters. "Richard, you're talking about a significant legal undertaking," James said over the phone. "To become their temporary guardian, there will be background checks, home studies, court appearances. Are you sure you're ready for this?" Richard watched through his office window as Emma taught David how to skip stones in the pool, while Jake napped on a lounge chair. David was laughing, really laughing, for the first time since Catherine's death. "James, Emma saved David's life yesterday. But more than that, she's brought something back to him that I thought was gone forever. Joy. Hope. What kind of man would I be if I let the system separate them or put them in foster care?" "A practical one," James replied bluntly. "Richard, these children have been traumatized. They'll need therapy, special attention, patience you might not have. And Emma, she's going to fight you every step of the way. Children who've had to survive on their own don't trust easily." As if to prove James's point, Richard heard raised voices from the pool area. He looked out to see Emma pulling Jake away from David, her face flushed with anger. "We have to go," Emma was saying, clutching Jake to her chest. "We can't stay here." Richard quickly ended his call and hurried outside. "Emma, what's wrong?" "David said his mom is in heaven watching him. Jake asked where our mom is." Emma's voice cracked. "He doesn't understand why she's not watching us too." David looked stricken. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to make anyone sad." Richard knelt beside Emma, who was struggling not to cry in front of the boys. "Emma, it's okay to be sad. It's okay to miss your parents." "No, it's not!" Emma burst out. "Being sad doesn't help. Crying doesn't bring them back. I have to take care of Jake, and I can't do that if I'm sad all the time." The raw pain in her voice revealed the impossible burden she'd placed on herself. Richard reached out instinctively, then stopped when Emma flinched away from his touch. "Emma, you're 7 years old. You're not supposed to take care of everything by yourself." "Who else is going to do it?" she demanded. "Jake is 3. He needs me." "You're right, Jake needs you, but you know what? You need someone too. Everyone does." Emma shook her head stubbornly. "We're fine alone." "Are you?" Richard asked quietly. When was the last time you played a game just for fun? When was the last time someone took care of you when you were scared or hurt? Emma's silence was answer enough. That afternoon, while Jake napped and David worked with his physical therapist, Richard found Emma in the library, curled up in a reading chair with a book she clearly couldn't fully understand yet. "Finding anything interesting?" he asked. "There are so many books," Emma said wonderingly. "Do you read all of them?" "No one could read all of them, but that's the beauty of having them. They're there when you need them." Richard sat down across from her. "Emma, I want to ask you something important, and I need you to really think about your answer." Emma tensed, her body language screaming flight risk. "Would you and Jake like to stay here? Not just for a few days, but for real. I'd like to become your legal guardian." Emma stared at him for a long moment. "Why?" "Because you saved my son. Because you deserve safety and food and a chance to be a kid. Because this house has been too quiet since Catherine died, and you and Jake have brought life back into it. What if you change your mind? What if we're too much trouble?" Richard's heart broke at the question. "Emma, I'm not going to lie and say everything will be perfect. Learning to be a family is hard work. But I won't change my mind. I won't leave you." Emma was quiet for so long, Richard thought she might not answer. Finally, in a voice barely above a whisper, she said, "Jake likes it here. He laughs more." "What about you? What do you like?" Emma looked around the library, then back at Richard. "I like that David isn't sad when we're here, and Maria hugs Jake without asking for anything back." She paused. "And you don't lie to us. You tell us the truth even when it's sad." Richard felt something shift in his chest. Hope, maybe. Or the first stirrings of what might become love. "So is that a yes?" he asked. Emma nodded slowly. "But if you hurt Jake, I'll run away with him." Richard smiled sadly. "I wouldn't expect anything less." 2 weeks later, the Sterling household had settled into a routine that would have been unimaginable a month before. Emma had started homeschooling sessions with a tutor Richard hired, while Jake spent mornings in a specialized daycare program designed for children who'd experienced trauma. The changes in both children were remarkable. Jake had gained 5 pounds and rarely cried anymore. His vocabulary was expanding daily, and he'd developed an adorable habit of reading picture books to David's teddy bear. Emma's transformation was more subtle, but equally significant. She still maintained her protective vigilance, but she'd begun to let her guard down in small ways. She helped Maria in the kitchen, taught David card games, and had even been caught playing with Jake's toys when she thought no one was watching. But it was David's transformation that truly amazed Richard. The boy, who had barely spoken since his mother's death, now chatted constantly with Emma and Jake. He'd stopped having nightmares and had even asked to try swimming again. "Dad, can we go to the beach today?" David asked over breakfast. "I want to show Emma and Jake the tide pools." Richard tensed slightly. They hadn't been back to the beach since the day they met, the day that had changed all their lives. Emma noticed his hesitation immediately. "We don't have to go if you don't want to." "It's not that," Richard explained. That beach holds difficult memories." "But good ones too," Emma said quietly. "That's where we found each other." The simple statement hit Richard with unexpected force. Where we found each other. As if their meeting hadn't been chance but destiny. "You're right," he said, smiling. "Let's go to the beach." Later that morning, as they set up their spot on the sand, Richard marveled at how different everything felt. David was laughing as Jake built elaborate but structurally impossible sand castles. Emma sat nearby, vigilant but relaxed, reading a book about dolphins she'd chosen from the library. "Mr. Sterling?" A familiar voice interrupted his thoughts. Dr. Sarah Martinez approached their group, wearing casual clothes and a surprised smile. "I thought that was you. How are David and the children?" Richard stood to greet her. "Dr. Martinez." "They're doing wonderfully. Emma and Jake are. They're part of our family now. Dr. Martinez's eyebrows rose. You went through with guardianship? That's wonderful news. How has the adjustment been? Challenging but rewarding, Richard admitted. Emma's been seeing a child psychologist and Jake's in therapy too, but they're resilient kids. And you? How are you handling sudden fatherhood ×3? Richard looked at his makeshift family. David was teaching Jake how to pack sand properly, while Emma had abandoned her book to help build what appeared to be a sand fortress. I never thought I'd say this, but my life finally feels complete again. Dr. Martinez followed his gaze. They've all healed each other, haven't they? David looks like a completely different child. Before Richard could respond, Emma came running over, her face flushed with excitement. Richard! Richard! Jake just said his first complete sentence, a real one. What did he say? He said, Emma, help me make David's castle bigger, all by himself. Emma's joy was infectious, and Richard found himself grinning. Dr. Martinez watched the interaction with professional interest. Emma seems much more comfortable calling you Richard now. Have you discussed the possibility of her calling you Dad? The question caught Richard off guard. No, I didn't want to push. She's been taking care of herself for so long, I thought she might not want a father figure. Mr. Sterling, that little girl has been carrying adult responsibilities for months. Sometimes the greatest gift you can give a parentified child is permission to be a child again. But that requires her to trust that someone else will be the adult. That evening, as Richard tucked Jake into bed, a ritual that still amazed him with its simple intimacy, he found Emma waiting in the hallway. Richard, can I ask you something? Always. Emma fidgeted with the hem of her pajama top, a habit she'd developed when nervous. What made you want to keep us, really? Richard sat down on the hallway floor, gesturing for Emma to join him. Do you want the simple answer or the complicated one? The real one. The real one is, I was drowning too, not in the ocean like David, but in sadness and loneliness. After Catherine died, I threw myself into work because it hurt less than being home. David needed me, but I didn't know how to help him when I could barely help myself. Emma listened intently, her expression serious. Then you came along, Richard continued. This fierce little girl who saved my son without thinking twice about her own safety. And watching you with Jake. Seeing how you loved him even when you were scared and hungry yourself. It reminded me what love actually looks like. Not the easy kind, but the kind that shows up even when it's hard. Is that why you wanted to help us? Because we reminded you of something? Richard shook his head. I wanted to help you because you deserved it. Because Jake deserved it. Because love isn't a finite resource. The more you share it, the more you have. Emma was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was small and uncertain. Richard, would it be okay if sometimes? Maybe I called you Dad. Not all the time, just when I want to. Richard felt tears prick his eyes. Emma, I would be honored. She scooted closer to him on the floor. And would it be okay if I hugged you? I haven't hugged anyone except Jake in a really long time. Richard opened his arms, and Emma melted into them with a sigh that seemed to release months of pent-up fear and exhaustion. Dad, she whispered against his shoulder. Yes, sweetheart. Thank you for not giving up on us. Richard held her tighter, knowing that she'd given him far more than he'd given her. Thank you for saving all of us. 3 months had passed since that life-changing day on the beach, and the Sterling household was preparing for their first major milestone, Emma's 8th birthday. Richard had never planned a child's birthday party before, but with David's enthusiastic input and Maria's practical wisdom, they'd organized what promised to be a memorable celebration. Dad, did you remember the rainbow cake? Emma asked for the 5th time that morning. She'd developed an endearing habit of overthinking special occasions, as if expecting them to be taken away. Maria finished decorating it an hour ago, Richard assured her, adjusting the tie on his best suit. "And yes, we have enough presents. And yes, Jake's favorite juice boxes are in the refrigerator." Emma grinned, her anxiety melting into excitement. The transformation in her was remarkable. She'd gained 15 pounds of healthy weight. Her hair had grown back to a glossy shine, and most importantly, she smiled freely now. "I can't believe I'm 8, she said, spinning in her new dress, the first birthday dress she'd ever owned. "I can't believe we're having a party with actual kids from your class," Richard replied. Emma had started attending the local elementary school and had slowly begun making friends. Today, 5 classmates would be joining David, Jake, and several adult friends Richard considered family. The doorbell rang, and Emma raced to answer it with David wheeling close behind. Jake toddled after them, wearing a little bow tie that made him look impossibly adorable. "Emma!" squealed her best friend Sophia, an energetic girl whose parents had become friends with Richard. "Happy birthday!" Soon the house was filled with the chaos of children's laughter, party games, and the kind of joyful noise Richard had never imagined his home could contain. He stood in the doorway between the kitchen and living room, watching Emma teach her friends how to play a card game she'd learned from David. "She's a natural leader, isn't she?" Richard turned to find James Patterson, his lawyer, approaching with a glass of punch. James had become more than just legal counsel over the past months. He'd been instrumental in navigating the complex adoption process. "She's incredible," Richard agreed. "Sometimes I forget she's only 8. She has this wisdom that comes from having to grow up too fast." "Speaking of which," James said quietly, "I have news about the final adoption paperwork. The judge wants to meet with all of you next Friday. It's just a formality at this point, but she likes to speak with the children before making it official." Richard felt a flutter of anxiety. "Do you think there could be any problems?" "Richard, look around you." James gestured toward the party. "Emma has friends her own age. Jake is hitting all his developmental milestones. David is thriving in ways his doctors never expected. You've created something beautiful here." Before Richard could respond, a small commotion erupted in the living room. Jake had fallen while trying to climb onto David's lap and had scraped his knee. The toddler's wails brought Emma running immediately. "It's okay, Jakey," Emma soothed, kneeling beside him. "Let me see." But instead of taking charge as she once would have, Emma looked up at Richard. "Dad, can you help? I think he needs a Band-Aid." The simple request represented a monumental shift. Emma was still protective of Jake, but she'd learned to share that responsibility with Richard. She'd learned to be a big sister instead of a substitute parent. Richard quickly cleaned and bandaged Jake's knee, while Emma held his hand and made silly faces to distract him. Within minutes, Jake was back to playing as if nothing had happened. "You're getting good at this parenting thing," said Dr. Patricia Williams, the family therapist who'd been working with all of them. She'd come to the party not just as their doctor, but as someone who'd become genuinely invested in their success. "I'm learning," Richard replied. "Mostly from them, honestly." Dr. Williams nodded thoughtfully. "Richard, when you first brought Emma and Jake to see me, I was concerned about attachment issues, trauma responses, the typical challenges we see with children who've experienced abandonment. But what I've observed here today, it's remarkable." "What do you mean?" "Watch Emma. She's fully present in this moment. She's not scanning for exits or threats. She's not hoarding food or toys. She's just being a kid. That level of healing doesn't happen without incredible love and patience." As if summoned by their conversation, Emma appeared at Richard's side, slightly breathless from playing but glowing with happiness. "Dad, it's time for cake," she announced. "And I want to make a speech first, okay?" Richard's eyebrows rose in surprise. "Of course, sweetheart." The party guests gathered around as Maria brought out the spectacular rainbow cake, complete with 8 candles. Emma stood on a chair so everyone could see her, suddenly looking very serious. "I wanted to thank everyone for coming to my birthday," she began, her voice clear and confident. "But mostly I want to thank my dad." Richard felt his throat tighten with emotion. "A year ago, I didn't think I'd ever have another birthday party," Emma continued. "Jake and I were alone and scared, and we didn't think anyone would ever want us. But then Dad's son David almost drowned, and after I helped save him, Dad saved us right back." There wasn't a dry eye in the room. "Dad taught me that families aren't just about being born together. Sometimes they're about choosing each other, and I choose this family every day." Emma looked directly at Richard. "I love you, Dad. Thank you for never giving up on us." The room erupted in applause as Richard stepped forward to lift Emma off the chair and into the biggest hug of her life. Jake toddled over and wrapped his little arms around both of them, while David wheeled over to complete their group embrace. "I love you too, Emma," Richard whispered into her hair. "All of you. Forever." As they lit the candles and sang Happy Birthday, Richard realized that this was just the beginning of their story. There would be challenges ahead. Teenage years, college applications, heartbreaks and triumphs he couldn't even imagine yet. But as he watched Emma make her wish and blow out her candles, surrounded by the family they'd all chosen and created together, Richard Sterling knew one thing with absolute certainty. Sometimes the greatest rescues happen not in moments of crisis, but in the quiet daily choice to love unconditionally. The little girl who had saved his son had ultimately saved them all. The courthouse steps felt imposing as the Sterling family approached the final adoption hearing. Emma clutched Richard's hand while Jake held the other. David's wheelchair hummed softly beside them. "Are you nervous, sweetheart?" Richard asked Emma, noticing her quiet demeanor. "A little," Emma admitted. "What if the judge doesn't think we belong together?" Richard knelt to her level on the courthouse steps. "Emma, we are already a family. This is just paperwork to make it official." Inside, Judge Margaret Thompson reviewed their file. She'd seen countless adoption cases, but this family intrigued her. The billionaire who'd taken in 2 homeless orphans. "Mr. Sterling," Judge Thompson began, "this is unusual. Most people go through agencies, extensive background checks. You essentially rescued these children from the street." "Your Honor, they rescued me," Richard replied firmly. "Emma saved my son's life, but more than that, she brought our family back to life." The judge turned to Emma. "Young lady, do you understand what adoption means?" Emma stood straighter. "It means Richard becomes our real dad forever. It means Jake and I have a forever family. And is that what you want?" "Yes, ma'am, more than anything." Emma glanced at Jake building blocks with David. "Jake doesn't remember our first parents, but now he calls Richard Daddy, and he's happy every day." Judge Thompson interviewed each child, noting David's earnest explanation of how Emma had become his best friend, and Jake's simple concern about getting ice cream after the important meeting. "Mr. Sterling," Judge Thompson said finally, "I've reviewed psychological evaluations, school reports, and statements from everyone involved. These children have thrived under your care in astounding ways." Richard's heart raced. "However, I have concerns. You're a single father, incredibly wealthy with demanding responsibilities. How do I know you won't tire of this when children become inconvenient?" Emma's hand squeezed Richard's. "Your Honor," Richard said quietly, 6 months ago, I was drowning in grief. Emma didn't just save David from the ocean. She saved all of us from drowning in sorrow. These children aren't my responsibility, they're my heart." Judge Thompson studied his face. "And you understand this is permanent? No changing your mind during difficult teenage years?" "Your Honor, they've already changed me in ways I never expected. I can't imagine life without them." After reviewing notes, the judge smiled slightly. "In 23 years, I've rarely seen transformation this complete. These children went from homeless and traumatized to thriving members of society." She picked up her gavel. It is the order of this court that Emma Rose Sterling and Jake Michael Sterling are hereby legally adopted by Richard James Sterling. Congratulations, family." Emma burst into tears of joy, throwing herself into Richard's arms. Jake toddled over, sensing celebration. David whooped with excitement, and Maria dabbed her eyes. Leaving the courthouse officially as the Sterling family, Richard felt profound completion. On steps they'd climbed with nervous hope, they descended with absolute certainty. "Dad," Emma said, using the now legal title, "can we celebrate with ice cream?" "We can celebrate however you want, sweetheart," Richard replied. "We have the rest of our lives to celebrate being a family." 2 months after adoption, the Sterling family faced their first major crisis. Emma had complained of headaches for days, but Tuesday morning she collapsed in the kitchen while helping Maria prepare breakfast. "Emma!" Richard shouted, rushing to where she lay unconscious. Jake began crying, and David called 911 with emergency training they'd all learned. At Miami Children's Hospital, Dr. Martinez ran tests. Emma drifted in and out of consciousness, gripping Richard's hand with surprising strength. "Dad," she whispered during a lucid moment, "am I going to die like Mommy and Daddy?" Richard's heart broke. "No, sweetheart, we'll figure out what's wrong and fix it, I promise." Dr. Martinez pulled Richard aside after MRI results. Her expression was grave but hopeful. "Richard, Emma has a brain tumor. It's benign but pressing on important areas. The good news is it's operable. We need Dr. Elizabeth Santos, the best pediatric neurosurgeon on the East Coast." "Get her," Richard said immediately. "Whatever it costs, get her." Dr. Santos arrived within hours from Boston. After reviewing scans, she was cautiously optimistic. "The tumor is accessible, but surgery will be lengthy and complex. There are risks, temporary memory loss, motor changes, complications, but without surgery, the tumor continues growing." Richard faced an impossible decision. In the hallway, David sat quietly, while Jake napped in Maria's arms. "Emma needs to be part of this decision," Richard told Dr. Santos. "She's 8, but she's been making life-or-death choices since she was 7. When Emma was alert, Dr. Santos explained in age-appropriate terms. Emma listened with serious attention. She'd given survival decisions on the streets. "If I don't have surgery, will I get sicker?" Emma asked. "Yes, sweetheart, the tumor will keep growing. And if I have surgery, I might forget things. Small chance, but I'm very good at this surgery, and I believe you'll be fine." Emma was quiet, then looked at Richard. "Dad, what should I do?" Richard took her hand. "Emma, I think you should fight. You've been fighting your whole life without giving up. This is just another fight, but you don't fight alone. We're all here." Emma nodded decisively. "Okay, let's do surgery. But Dad, if something happens, promise you'll take care of Jake forever." Richard had to leave the room to compose himself. The surgery lasted 6 hours. Richard paced while Maria prayed quietly, and Jake played, too young to understand. David researched brain surgery, needing to understand what was happening. Dr. Santos emerged at 3 p.m., tired but smiling. "Surgery was successful. We removed the entire tumor, and brain function looks normal. She's a fighter, Richard. Recovery was challenging." Emma suffered temporary memory gaps and had to relearn motor skills, but her personality remained intact. "Dad," she said on her 4th hospital day, "I had a weird dream during surgery. I saw Mommy and Daddy. They said they were proud of me for finding you and taking care of Jake." Richard felt tears spring up. "What else did they say?" "They said families come different ways. Some are born, some chosen, some rescued. They said they're happy we're together." 2 weeks later, sitting in the garden with her head still bandaged but spirit returned, Emma made a stunning announcement. "I want to start a foundation for kids who are alone like Jake and I were. Kids who need families but don't know how to find them. Richard stared at his 8-year-old daughter. Emma, that's wonderful. What would you call it? Emma smiled radiantly. The Second Chance Foundation, because everyone deserves a second chance at happiness. 1 year later, Emma stood before 500 people at the Second Chance Foundation's first gala. At 9, she wore a beautiful blue dress and spoke with confidence that amazed everyone. When I was 7, my brother Jake and I were alone and hungry. We thought nobody wanted us, but sometimes helping someone else helps yourself too. The crowd was captivated. Richard watched from the front row, David beside him, Jake on his lap playing with a toy car. The Second Chance Foundation helped 43 children find families this year, Emma continued. But we've helped families too. Sometimes parents who lost children need to love again. And children who lost parents need to be loved again. The foundation exceeded expectations. Emma's idea had grown into a legitimate organization with professional staff, partnerships with agencies, and innovative programs connecting traumatized children with equipped families. Emma has become quite the speaker, whispered Margaret Chen, the foundation's director Richard had hired. She's always been wise beyond her years, Richard replied. Now she has a platform to share that wisdom. After Emma's speech, the gala continued with dinner and fundraising. Several families connected through the foundation were present, their success stories serving as living testimonials. Mr. Sterling? A woman approached hesitantly. I'm Jennifer Walsh. Your foundation helped us adopt Lily 6 months ago. Richard greeted her. How is Lily adjusting? See for yourself, Jennifer smiled, gesturing toward the dance floor where a shy 6-year-old danced with Jake, both giggling. Lily was in 3 foster homes before we found each other. She was withdrawn, afraid to speak. But Emma wrote her a letter. She writes to all program kids. That letter made Lily believe families could be forever. Richard swelled with pride. Emma personally wrote to every child the foundation helped, sharing her story and offering hope. Later, riding home in comfortable silence, Emma surprised them with an announcement. I want to write a book, she said matter-of-factly. About what? Richard asked. About kids like us. How families can be different but still real. How love isn't something you're born with. It's something you choose every day. David turned to look at her. What would you call it? Emma smiled. Finding Home. A story about second chances. Richard realized his daughter had found her calling at 9. She wasn't just a survivor, she was a healer, helping broken families find wholeness. Would you like help finding a publisher? Richard asked. Actually, I hoped you could help me write it. You're part of the story too, Dad. Over following months, Richard and Emma worked together evenings in his study, Emma dictating memories while Richard shaped them into narrative. The process was therapeutic for both. Dad, Emma said one evening, do you wonder what would have happened if David hadn't almost drowned? Richard considered seriously. I think about it sometimes. But I remember what you told the judge. Families find each other when they need to, maybe different circumstances. But I believe we were meant to be together. Emma nodded thoughtfully. I used to be angry at God for taking our first parents. But now I think maybe he knew we needed you, and you needed us. Sometimes bad things happen so good things can happen later. Her wisdom struck Richard profoundly. At 9, Emma had developed a philosophy of hope that adults struggled to achieve. Emma, you and Jake saved me just as much as I saved you. Maybe more. How? After Catherine died, I forgot how to love, how to hope. I was existing, not living. You taught me love multiplies when shared, that healing happens when you help others heal. Emma climbed into his lap. Dad, do you think our first parents are proud? I know they are, sweetheart. They're proud of how you protected Jake, helped other kids, grown into an amazing young woman. That night, tucking Emma into bed, she made a final observation. Dad, I'm glad I saved David. not just because he's my brother now, but because saving him led us to you. Sometimes the best things happen when you're not thinking about yourself." Richard kissed her forehead. "Sweet dreams, my brave girl." At the door, Emma's voice stopped him. "Dad, tomorrow can we call Jake's speech therapist? I think he's ready to tell his story to other kids. He's braver than he knows." Richard smiled in darkness. His daughter was still rescuing people, one heart at a time. The call came at 2 a.m. on a Tuesday in March. Richard answered groggily, expecting business emergency, but heard Detective Sarah Reynolds' panicked voice. "Mr. Sterling, we have a situation. A 9-year-old girl and 4-year-old brother were abandoned at a gas station downtown. The girl specifically asked for Emma Sterling. She says Emma wrote her a letter 6 months ago." Richard was instantly awake. "What do you mean she asked for Emma?" "The girl, Sophia Martinez, was on your foundation's waiting list. She memorized your address from Emma's letter. She walked 4 miles in rain with her brother to find your house but got lost. She's terrified of going into the system again." Richard looked at the clock. Emma and Jake were asleep, exhausted from a foundation event. David was at a sleepover. "Detective Reynolds will be there in 30 minutes. He woke Emma gently. "Sweetheart, there's a little girl who needs our help. She asked for you specifically." Emma was instantly alert, protective instincts sharp. What happened? At the station, they found Sophia Martinez huddled in a corner with her brother Diego. The girl's eyes were fierce but frightened, her protective stance achingly familiar to Richard. "Sophia?" Emma approached slowly. "I'm Emma. You wrote to me?" Sophia's facade cracked slightly. "You said in your letter you found a real family. You said there was hope." Emma knelt to Sophia's level. "There is hope. Tell me what happened." The story emerged slowly. Sophia and Diego's grandmother, who'd raised them after their mother's death, had passed suddenly. Distant relatives took them in, but decided they were too much trouble. The children were abandoned, with nothing but clothes on their backs. "I kept your letter," Sophia whispered, pulling a crumpled envelope from her pocket. "You wrote that your dad chose to love you. I wanted someone to choose us, too." Richard felt his heart breaking and expanding. Emma had influenced this child's life from hundreds of miles away, simply through sharing her story. "Sophia," Emma said seriously, "choosing family is the most important thing. But first, you and Diego need to be safe and fed. Would you like to come home with us tonight?" Sophia's eyes widened. "You mean it? You're not just saying that?" "Emma never says things she doesn't mean," Richard interjected gently. "We have room and experience with scared kids who need love." Back home, Maria immediately sprang into action, preparing meals and setting up guest rooms. Jake woke and, with typical 3-year-old resilience, immediately accepted Diego as a new playmate. But Emma's interaction with Sophia truly amazed Richard. She seemed to instinctively understand exactly what the older girl needed, not pity or overwhelming kindness, but respect and honesty. "The first few nights are hardest," Emma told Sophia as they sat on the deck overlooking the ocean. "You'll keep expecting someone to tell you it was a mistake, that you have to leave. When does that feeling go away?" Sophia asked. "It takes time. For me, it was when Dad let me help make decisions about Jake's care, when he treated me like family, not like a charity case." Richard watched from the kitchen window as his daughter counseled a child experiencing the same trauma she'd once faced. Emma's wisdom and empathy were remarkable, but what struck him most was her complete lack of resentment about her own experiences. Over following days, navigating emergency custody and potentially adding 2 more children to their family, Richard marveled at how naturally everyone adapted. David welcomed Diego into his room, teaching games and including him in physical therapy that became playtime. Jake took on big boy helper role, showing Diego where toys were kept and which books were most fun. But Emma's transformation truly amazed everyone. She'd grown from protected to protector, survivor to healer. She anticipated Sophia's needs, shared coping strategies, and gradually helped the frightened girl begin to trust. "Emma," Sophia said one evening, working on homework together, "why did you help me? You don't even know me." Emma looked up from math problems. "Because somebody helped me when I needed it most. And because helping other people heal helps me heal too." Richard overheard from the hallway and felt tears spring to his eyes. His daughter understood that love wasn't finite, but an infinite well that deepened with sharing. 2 weeks later, Judge Thompson reviewed the emergency custody petition for Sophia and Diego. "Mr. Sterling," she said with a slight smile, "you seem to be making a habit of rescuing children." "Actually, Your Honor, they rescue each other. And they rescue me." Leaving the courthouse with 2 new family members, Richard realized their story wasn't ending. It was expanding. The little girl who'd saved his son from drowning was now saving other children from despair, one act of love at a time. 5 years had passed since that first day on the beach, and the Sterling family had grown beyond imagination. Emma, now 12, stood before the United Nations Children's Fund Assembly in New York, delivering a speech broadcast worldwide. "5 years ago, my 3-year-old brother and I were homeless and starving," Emma began confidently. "Today, we're part of a family of 7, and our foundation has helped over 800 children find permanent homes." The international audience listened in rapt attention. Richard watched from the front row, surrounded by his expanded family. David, now 11 and walking with leg braces. Jake, 8 and thriving. Sophia, 14 and talking about becoming a social worker. And Diego, 9 and the family comedian. "The Second Chance Foundation doesn't just match children with families," Emma continued. "We've learned that healing happens in communities. Traumatized children heal better when they help other traumatized children." After her speech, Emma was approached by delegates from 12 countries wanting to implement similar programs. The foundation had become a model for innovative child welfare practices. "Miss Sterling," asked Dr. Amara Okafor from UNICEF Nigeria, "you were only 7 when this journey began. What advice would you give other children facing similar situations?" Emma considered seriously. "Being brave doesn't mean you're not scared. It means you do the right thing even when terrified, and love is always possible, even when it seems impossible." That evening, at a gala honoring innovative child welfare approaches, Richard reflected on their extraordinary journey. The scared, fierce little girl who'd saved David had become an internationally recognized children's rights advocate. "Dad," Emma appeared beside him during reception, "there's someone I want you to meet." She led him to a confident young woman in her early 20s. "This is Dr. Lisa Chen," Emma said proudly. "She was one of the first kids our foundation helped. She just finished medical school." Lisa smiled, extending her hand. "Mr. Sterling, I wanted to thank you. Your family gave me hope when I had none. Now I'm starting pediatric surgery residency, hoping to help children the way your family helped me." Richard felt familiar tightness in his chest. "Lisa, seeing you succeed is thanks enough. You made your own dreams come true. But I couldn't have done it without believing someone cared about my future." Emma's letter made me feel like I mattered. Throughout the evening, Richard met several young adults whose lives had been changed by the foundation. Teachers, social workers, business owners, artists, all carrying forward the message of hope and second chances. Later, back in their hotel suite, the family gathered for traditional evening reflection. Each member shared something they were grateful for and looked forward to. "I'm grateful we could all be here together," David said. "And I'm looking forward to starting high school next year without my wheelchair." "I'm grateful for pizza room service," Diego announced, making everyone laugh. "And I'm looking forward to beating Jake at video games tomorrow." Jake rolled his eyes. I'm grateful for my family, and I'm looking forward to proving Diego wrong. Sophia spoke thoughtfully. I'm grateful for second chances. And I'm looking forward to starting my foundation internship this summer. Richard looked around at his children, biological, adopted, and chosen. I'm grateful for all of you, for our work together, and for the reminder that love multiplies when shared. Finally, all eyes turned to Emma. At 12, she carried maturity that came not from being forced to grow up quickly, but from finding her purpose in helping others. I'm grateful for that day at the beach, she said simply. Not because of what happened to David. I never want anyone in danger, but because it brought us together. It started everything. She looked around at her family, with eyes holding both wisdom and wonder. And I'm looking forward to tomorrow, because every day brings new chances to help someone find their family. Every day is another opportunity to prove love is stronger than fear. Richard squeezed Emma's hand. What happens next for us, sweetheart? Emma smiled, the same radiant expression that had first captured his heart on Miami Beach 5 years earlier. I think we keep saving each other, Dad, one heart at a time. 10 years had passed since that life-changing day on Miami Beach, and Emma Sterling stood at Harvard University's graduation ceremony podium, delivering the commencement address at age 17, the youngest speaker in the university's history. When I was 7 years old, Emma began clearly, I thought survival meant never trusting anyone. I thought family was something that happened to other people. I thought love was a luxury I couldn't afford. Richard sat in the front row, tears streaming. Beside him sat David, 21 and walking without assistance after graduating MIT with engineering degrees. Jake, 13 and shooting up rapidly, leaned against Sophia, 19 and finishing her social work degree. Diego, 14 and still the family comedian, whispered something making Jake snort with laughter. Today, graduating with degrees in psychology and international relations, I want to talk about the mathematics of love, Emma continued. Most people think love operates like subtraction. The more you give, the less you have. But love operates like multiplication. The more you share, the exponentially more you create. In 10 years, the Second Chance Foundation had revolutionized child welfare practices in 37 countries. Emma had been featured on magazine covers, written best-selling books, and been nominated for a Nobel Peace Prize. The Sterling family's story began with a rescue, Emma said. My little brother and I were saved by a man whose son I had helped save from drowning. But we've learned rescue isn't a one-time event, it's a daily choice. We rescue each other every morning when we choose love over fear, hope over despair. After the ceremony, the family gathered at their traditional celebration spot, the same beach where everything began, now transformed into the Emma Sterling Children's Center. Emma, Richard said, walking along the water's edge, I need to tell you something I've never said before. Emma looked at him curiously. At 17, she had grown into a remarkable young woman, brilliant, compassionate, and grounded. That day, you saved David, Richard continued. I thought you were just a brave kid doing the right thing. But now I understand. You weren't just saving David. You were creating the family we were all meant to be. Emma smiled, linking her arm through his. Dad, we saved each other. That's what families do. Jake ran toward them, face flushed with excitement. Emma! There's a news crew here wanting to interview our whole family about the new documentary. The documentary, Finding Home, the Emma Sterling Story, had premiered the previous month, sparking global conversation about innovative child welfare approaches. Do we have to? Emma asked with mock exasperation. I just graduated. Can't we be normal for one day? We're never going to be normal, Sophia pointed out, joining them. We're the family that proves love can conquer anything. That's miraculous. Diego bounded up behind her. Plus, you promised to teach me surfing today. David wheeled up in his manual chair. The interview might be good. They want to announce the Foundation's international expansion. Emma looked around at her family, people who had chosen each other and continued choosing each other daily. Okay, we'll do the interview. But afterward, we surf, eat cake, and tell embarrassing stories. Deal? Deal! The family chorused. The news interview became celebration, with the reporter moved by the obvious love permeating the Sterling family. When asked about future plans, Emma's answer surprised everyone. "I'm taking a gap year," she announced. "I want to spend time working directly with kids again, remembering why we started this." When you're changing the world, you need to step back and remember it's about changing individual lives, one person at a time. That evening, as the sun set over Miami Beach, the Sterling family sat around a bonfire on the same sand where their story began. Jake tried teaching Diego guitar. Sophia read child psychology books. David sketched adaptive playground designs. And Emma wrote in her 10-year journal. "Emma," Richard said quietly, "what are you writing about?" Emma looked up, eyes reflecting firelight. "I'm writing about this moment. About how 10 years ago, a scared little girl ran into the ocean to save a stranger's child, and how that one act of courage created ripples still spreading around the world." "And what conclusion are you drawing?" Emma smiled, closing her journal. "That every act of love creates possibilities we can't imagine. Every time we choose compassion over indifference, we change the world. And the best families aren't necessarily the ones you're born into. They're the ones who choose to love you unconditionally." As the fire crackled and waves lapped gently, Richard looked around at his extraordinary family. Homeless children had become world changers. The grieving widower had become father to 5. The paralyzed boy had learned to walk and dream without limits. Most importantly, they had all learned that love wasn't something you found. It was something you created, nurtured, and shared with an open heart. Emma Sterling had saved David from drowning, but in doing so, she had shown them all how to save each other from the deeper drowning of loneliness, despair, and hopelessness. As stars appeared overhead, Richard knew this wasn't their story's end, but the beginning of its next beautiful chapter. Somewhere in the world, there were still children needing saving, families needing forming, hearts needing healing. The Sterling family would be ready, because they had learned the most important lesson. Love multiplies when shared, hope grows when planted in willing hearts, and the greatest rescue is the one we perform on each other daily, simply by choosing to love without limits. The little girl who had once run into the ocean to save a stranger had taught them that the greatest courage isn't the dramatic rescue, but the quiet daily choice to open your heart to love, again and again, no matter how broken it's been before. And in that choice, miracles are born.